Psychotic degradation, in the sense of shifting from lighter to deeper psychotic form represented by successive SPM, symbolic psyche, is the most common form of personality evolution of the type 1 people with basic psychosis. I mentioned that it's theoretically possible for these people in the anxiety crisis of the current SPM to use this moment to relativize the SPM and generate an insight within the SPM's symbolic psyche to its fleeting fictional nature. It seems, however, that this is only a purely theoretical possibility because type 1 people are therefore type 1 people because they have a constitutive inability to self-reflect and therefore to take a distance from SPM, symbolic psyche. It's the failure to acquire this skill during childhood and adolescence until the threshold of maturity that the fate of a person's personality depends on. Namely, without the self-distancing ability of SPM, the personality will forever be the type 1 personality. And any future anxiety crises that arise as a result of insufficient anti-anxiety activity of the current psychotic SPM will invariably end up in the collapse of the existing SPM, symbolic psyche, and the emergence of a new, even more psychotic one, down to the deepest form of SPM psychosis, which is the paranoid personality. Of course, the above words are not optimistic, because we can see that in the case of the type 1 people, there is no optimistic version of personality evolution. Early recognition of the type 1 people of personality, however, can save the environment from endless conflict situations, because the knowledge that we are dealing with type 1 people allows us to better understand the behavior and to adopt an adequate attitude. And what is even more important, this knowledge makes us give up any attempt to find a compromise with the type 1 people because the lack of self-distancing SPM does not allow the type 1 people to deviate even minimally from the belief in the absolute truth carried by their own SPM, symbolic psyche. And the deeper the symbolic psyche SPM psychosis, the smaller the self-distance to the SPM, until the complete disappearance of the self-distance in the case of the paranoid SPM psychosis. Therefore, we can say it with certainty that a constitutive feature of the type 1 people is the personality change which is invariably oriented towards the deepening of the primary psychosis, sometimes reaching the level of the deepest psychosis, that's the paranoid psychosis. Do type 2 and type 3 people also experience personality changes? Of course not, never. Interestingly, the primary psychosis in these people remains unchanged throughout childhood and adulthood until old age, regardless the capacity of the psyche anti-anxiety mechanisms. This can be easily explained by the fact that psychosis as such, and in the form of SPM in particular, is not the type 2 and type 3, the basic, and the only anti-anxiety mechanism, as is the case of type 1 people. This is first. Secondly, the way out of the primary psychosis consists in crowning mental development by the ability to self-distance SPM. In other words, recovering from the primary psychosis is like discovering that it's not Santa Claus who brings the gifts for Christmas. This discovery can only be made once. The same with personality psychosis manifesting as the SPM. The mental maturity is precisely being able to discover the symbolic and not real existence of the SPM. Speaking the language of my lectures, it means the discovery and acceptance by SPM that SPM is an invention secondary to the SBM, symbolic brain creativity, that is simply SBM psychosis. Unfortunately, the mental maturity in the form of the ability to self-distance SPM costs a lot. The bigger the SPM self-distancing, the more helpless the SPM in the face of anxiety. We should always remember that SPM is a psychotic creation which function in all people is to neutralize the anxiety. Since SPM is able to relativize its own existence and is able to accept that it's actually a fiction, then it becomes almost useless as a psychosis to overcome the anxiety. Self-distancing of SPM in the type 3 and type 2 individuals leads to the deactivation of the SPM psychosis. We see each other in the next lecture.